After watching, write in the comments which historical photo shocked you the most. In Sacramento in 1979, a 23-year-old mortuary apprentice drove off in a hearse with a recently deceased man inside. A 4.5-page statement exposed a legal gap, ending in only 11 days in jail and a $255 fine. This Texas poster from October 1932 shows Clyde Barrow before Bonnie Parker became the name most people paired with him. The $200 reward and listed towns make it feel like an early map of a chase that soon became famous. Pamplona, July 7, 1947, shows the San Fermin Bull Run packed into a narrow street lined with balconies. The most striking detail is how close the crowd stayed to the route, with runners and watchers separated by only a few steps. This Madrid commuter train was photographed after the coordinated morning blasts of March 11, 2004, near Atocha station. The stripped carriages became a symbol of one of Europe's most serious security failures, just 3 days before Spain's national election. In Moscow in 1991, a Russian leader spoke outside Parliament as cameras crowded the ledge and a tricolor flag rose behind him. The failed coup, meant to save Soviet power, instead sped up the collapse of the system within months. Vietnam 1965 shows a detained man sitting alone in the grass while ARVN soldiers and helicopters fill the field behind him. The photo turns one small moment into a clear picture of how fast village searches could become military operations. In February 1942, men of the United States 503rd Parachute Ski Battalion slept directly on the snow after crossing rough mountain terrain. Their upright skis and packed gear show how the Army was testing troops for cold, high-altitude missions few units could handle. On July 7, 1941, German officers and Ukrainian committee leaders stood in Przemysl under a banner calling for a Ukrainian state. The rally happened just after Germany's first advances, when local power seemed to change almost overnight. In June 1989, this Lenin monument still stood in Krakow's Nowa Huta district, a model socialist city built around steel. Within months, Poland's political order was changing, making the quiet street scene feel like the end of an era. Near Groningen in 1940, Charles Breyer photographed Dutch potato diggers taking a field meal with muddy hands, paper cups, and bread wrapped in reused packaging. The close view turns a short work break into a sharp record of rural labor in the Netherlands as daily life was starting to change fast. This behind-the-scenes photo from Independence Day shows how the filmmakers used real damaged locations from the 1994 Northridge earthquake and nearby demolition sites. The result looked like a giant studio disaster scene, but much of the shattered concrete and broken streets were already real. In 1942, Miami Beach hotels and sand became a training ground for the United States Army Air Forces. This photo feels unreal because vacationers watched from the shade, while recruits drilled only steps from the ocean. During Hong Kong's 1967 unrest, real and fake street devices appeared across the city, making even small packages suspicious. This photographed object is chilling because it looks crude and ordinary, yet it carried a political message into everyday life. William Henry Johnson turned a rare medical condition into a nearly 70-year stage career and became one of Barnum's most recognized performers. Away from the act, he was known for a prized tuxedo, fierce pride in his fame, and a beach rescue at Coney Island. West Belfast, 1978, shows a young boy holding a stone on Leeson Street while unrest fills the road behind him. His smile beside the flaming car makes the photo feel unsettling because it shows how public disorder had entered ordinary childhood. Eddie Adams took this Saigon photograph on February 1, 1968, as a South Vietnamese general confronted a captured Viet Cong prisoner in the street. The image spread worldwide within hours, won a Pulitzer Prize, and changed how millions viewed the Vietnam conflict. This 1914 police portrait shows Felix Dzerzhinsky years before he became known as Iron Felix in Soviet history. After 1917, he helped build the early Soviet security system and led its first agencies until his sudden collapse after a 2-hour speech in 1926. This World War II United States Army Field Ration D was chocolate made less like candy and more like emergency fuel. Hershey designed it to resist heat, taste only mildly sweet, and give soldiers quick calories when regular food was unavailable. At Kitty Hawk in 1901, Wilbur and Orville Wright tested this motorless glider like a giant kite before building their powered aircraft. The ghostly blur on the glass negative shows how their first breakthrough came from careful wind tests, not from one sudden miracle. Howard Styles began performing in 1925 and toured the United States and Canada while keeping much of his private life quiet. Born with split hands and feet, he became known for his rare condition, his card skills, and work beside performers like Francesco Lentini. At Talent House in 1894, two sisters played cricket, years before one became a major modernist writer and the other a leading painter. The quiet game looks ordinary, but it captures the childhood world that later fed some of Britain's most influential art and literature. Before becoming a Hollywood actor, he spent part of his teenage years in a circus act with a lion named Sheba. The strange detail is that this was not a movie role, but a real early job that made his later screen presence feel even more unusual. On July 23, 1954, a Cathay Pacific passenger plane was mistaken for a Republic of China aircraft and struck by a Chinese fighter. Only 8 people survived, turning one civilian flight into a tense Cold War incident involving Britain, China, and the United States. Washington, July 7, 1865, shows the 4 convicted Lincoln conspirators on the old Arsenal scaffold as soldiers watched from the wall above. Mary Surratt stood among them as the first woman executed by the United States government, reportedly asking, "Please do not let me fall." Lithuania, July 1941, shows a Jewish building burning as German units and local collaborators moved through the newly occupied country. Gargsdei was targeted on the first day of the invasion, and Kaunas followed days later, making this one of the earliest waves of Nazi terror. Hungarian shooter Karoly Takacs lost the use of his right hand in 1938, then secretly trained himself to compete with his left. He won Olympic gold in the 25-meter rapid-fire pistol event in 1948 and 1952, turning a career-ending injury into a rare double victory. Justine Johnstone was a stage and silent screen actress in the 1920s before she left fame for medical research. She later worked with the team that helped develop the intravenous drip, moving from studio portraits to a hospital tool used worldwide. On a train in the United Kingdom in 1979, Debbie Harry sits behind a tabloid as Blondie was moving from punk clubs into global pop fame. The leather gloves, blank stare, and loud headline make the quiet carriage feel like a snapshot of late 1970s celebrity pressure. In St. Lo, after the Normandy landings, 2 boys watched from a tree as American vehicles moved through streets filled with rubble. Their quiet view shows how childhood continued above one of the most heavily damaged towns in Normandy. In Berlin in 1921, Albert Einstein stood in his home library during the year he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. The crowded shelves and paper stacks show the private workspace behind a man whose ideas were already changing modern science. In 1971, the Soyuz 11 crew returned from the world's first space station, and their capsule landed normally in Kazakhstan. Rescuers opened the hatch to a silent cabin after a pressure valve had opened high above Earth during descent. Around 1900, Chung On stood outside his Chinese merchandise shop in Virginia City, Montana, during the Chinese exclusion era. The small sign and plain wooden storefront show how immigrant merchants kept serving frontier towns even under heavy legal pressure. On July 7, 1928, a Missouri bakery sold the first machine-sliced wrapped bread using Otto Rovetter's invention. What looked like a simple bakery machine soon changed sandwiches, breakfast tables, and one of the most famous sayings in English. This Austro-Hungarian Romfell armored car was one of the most unusual military vehicles of the First World War, with sloped armor and a compact turret. Only a tiny number were built, possibly just 2, so this quiet roadside photo preserves a machine that almost disappeared from history. In 1864, samurai from Japan posed before the Sphinx during a diplomatic journey through Egypt on the way to Europe. The photo feels unreal because old Japan and ancient Egypt meet in one frame just before Japan began changing at extraordinary speed. In 1948, 2 New Zealand searchers found wild takahe in the remote Murchison Mountains after the bird had been declared extinct for 50 years. This photo captured the moment a museum species became living proof that a vanished animal could still be hiding in the mountains. In Algeria in May 1975, Kim Il-sung met President Houari Boumediene during a state visit built around Cold War alliances outside the Western Bloc. The calm garden scene hides a larger story of 2 governments trying to turn anti-colonial prestige into global influence. On August 4, 1949, United States Navy privateer patrol aircraft flew in formation over Miami Beach. The scene looks peaceful, but these long-range planes were built from wartime bomber designs and still carried the shape of the previous era. In Yaroslavl in 1984, an Aeroflot jet stood like a monument beside fountains and the 17th-century Korovniki church complex. The scene captures 2 symbols at once: old Orthodox towers in the distance and Soviet aviation in the park. In 1954, a rising Italian film star showed her billiard skills during a visit to an American military base. The staged moment feels playful, but the focused servicemen behind her turn a simple game into a perfect snapshot of post-war celebrity charm. On December 17, 1937, a young woman was photographed as a dragon design was being marked onto her back. At that time, tattoos were still unusual in mainstream fashion, which makes this quiet studio scene feel far ahead of its era. In 1978, the future Russian president spoke in Sverdlovsk at a Komsomol anniversary under a giant Lenin image. The photo is striking because he appears as a loyal Soviet regional boss, years before he helped break the system behind that portrait. In Wisconsin in November 1957, officers examined Ed Gein's truck inside a farm shed shortly after his arrest. The same vehicle was later turned into a traveling sideshow display, making an already strange rural case even more unsettling. This rare carte de visite shows young Liliuokalani before she became Hawaii's last reigning monarch in 1891. She later ruled through the final crisis of the Hawaiian kingdom, ending with the loss of the monarchy in 1893. In Normandy in July 1944, American soldiers rested inside the damaged church of St. George during the fight for Hill 192. Frank Churchill's photo shows a strange pause in battle, with tired men cleaning their gear beneath statues and broken beams. Private Andrew Speece III landed at Utah Beach on June 6, 1944, with the 90th Infantry Division. 1 month later, his story ended in the Normandy hedgerows, and his likeness was later chosen for a memorial statue in Perrier, France. In northern France on July 6, 1944, United States infantrymen dropped into a ditch after a hidden German marksman stopped their advance. The center soldier prepared a rifle-launched round, showing how one concealed position in the Normandy hedgerows could freeze an entire patrol. California in 1965 shows a Hells Angels rider and his partner on the road during a club run. The blurred background and her glance at the camera turn the moving motorcycle into a sharp snapshot of outlaw biker culture entering public view. On July 7, 1944, United States troops began the push toward St. Lo, a key road hub 20 miles inland from the Normandy beaches. The hedgerow country turned each field into a small fortress, so progress depended on close teams, heavy guns, and careful movement through narrow lanes. In Malang in October 1967, Java's military commanders gathered as General Suharto's new order was taking shape. The plane group photo hides a major political shift, with regional army power helping lock in Indonesia's next era. This portrait shows Private Edwin Francis Jemison of the 2nd Louisiana Regiment before the Peninsula Campaign made his young face known to history. He was only 17 when he died at Malvern Hill in July 1862, turning a formal studio photo into one of the American Civil War's most remembered teenage portraits. At RAF Debden in 1943, Lieutenant Howard Hively walked with his dog Duke beside a P-47 Thunderbolt after moving from the RAF Eagle Squadron to the United States Army Air Forces. He later became one of the 4th Fighter Group's top pilots, credited with 14.5 aerial victories. In Sarajevo on September 14, 1992, a young Bosnian woman waited outside Lion Cemetery with a cigarette and a rifle at her side. The photo is unsettling because it turns a funeral day into a portrait of how normal life and frontline survival became almost impossible to separate. In 1957, engineers at Systems Labs in California worked through orbital math by hand on a giant outdoor board. The ladders and chalk marks show the early space age before digital computers took over the hard calculations. In 1969, a helicopter door gunner operated an M60D on the M23 mount from the open side of the aircraft. The photo shows how Vietnam air crews worked in exposed positions, relying on heavy gear, headsets, and split-second coordination above the ground. This colorized royal gathering shows how tightly Europe's ruling families were connected through marriage, uniforms, and court tradition. The calm faces look formal, but the image feels heavier because several empires in this circle were nearing their final decades. John Downing photographed this young skinhead in Southend-on-Sea in 1980, caught beside a police officer and a waiting coach. His shaved head, tattoos, hard stare, and hand sign turned one street moment into a blunt record of British youth subculture. On October 15, 1944, this B-17 returned from a mission to Cologne with its nose section ripped open and equipment exposed. Almost the entire crew made it back, which makes the photograph look less like a wreck and more like proof of how much damage these aircraft could absorb. After the United States destroyer Strong went down in 1943, Lieutenant Hugh Miller reached Japanese-held Arundel Island alone and injured. He survived for weeks behind enemy lines, used supplies he found, and was later rescued before receiving the Navy Cross and 2 Silver Stars. Rudy Opitz wore a head-mounted robot camera to film the instrument panel during Messerschmitt 163B test flights. The strange setup shows how engineers captured flight data before compact electronic recorders could do the job automatically. On July 6, 1919, the British airship R-34 landed in New York after completing the first Atlantic crossing by an airship. Its huge silver body arrived like a flying ocean liner, proving that long-distance air travel was no longer just a dream. At Arzew in Algeria on November 8, 1942, United States Rangers held a German coastal position during the first hours of Operation Torch. The photo captures a rare early moment for the Rangers, when a small new unit helped open the Allied campaign in North Africa. In a Soviet field hospital, nurses worked between rows of patients on simple folding beds under dim light. The crowded room shows how frontline medicine often depended on calm hands, improvised space, and constant care. In the 1951 film The Day the Earth Stood Still, this blackboard mixed real orbital physics with invented symbols for the story. Some equations came from astronomy professor Samuel Herrick, including 3 body motion and Kepler-related formulas. In January 1942, Soviet troops moved toward the Volkhov Front through deep snow with horses, sleds, and winter gear. The long white road shows how much of the campaign depended on slow movement, frozen supplies, and men pushing forward in extreme cold. Near Königsberg in 1945, armored vehicles moved through smoke as the battle for East Prussia reached its final stage. The city's fall cut away one of Germany's last major Baltic strongholds and signaled how close the war in Europe was to ending. In Pittsburgh on August 26, 1913, workers rebuilt the Pennsylvania Railroad cut to change the Homewood Avenue grade. The scene captures a city being reshaped by steam power, rail traffic, and street engineering, while daily life continued just above the tracks. In 1941, heavy Soviet tanks crossed Palace Square in Leningrad, then called Uritsky Square, on their way to the front. The slogan on the lead turret promised to defend the gains of October, turning the former Imperial Square into a Soviet wartime stage. In the Pacific Theater during the World War II, a United States Marine was photographed sliding a captured Japanese officer's sword back into its scabbard. Such swords became prized souvenirs, and some were hidden in equipment or luggage before later ending up in collections or returning to Japanese families. On July 8, 1967, Hong Kong police detained a protester during unrest tied to strikes and pro-Beijing demonstrations against British rule. The raised fist and police helmets capture a moment when Cold War politics spilled directly into the colony's streets. On July 16, 1969, Jan Armstrong and her sons watched from across the water as Neil Armstrong left Earth aboard Apollo 11. The small family scene feels unreal because the bright trail in the sky was not just a launch, but the start of the first human journey to the moon. In Berlin in 1961, American tanks stood near Checkpoint Charlie as the Cold War reached one of its sharpest street-level moments. The sign, the empty road, and the tanks show how one city block became a direct test between the United States and the Soviet bloc. This leather ball may be one of the oldest footballs in the world, found in the 1980s inside the roof of Stirling Castle. Its hiding place above Mary Queen of Scots' bedroom makes the small stitched object feel like a secret from 16th century royal life. This 1980s family photo captures 4 siblings in a quiet suburb with big hair, bright clothes, and a parked sedan setting the time perfectly. It feels like an ordinary sidewalk moment, but every detail now reads like a small time capsule of American teenage life. In the 1950s, long road trips often meant stopping beside the road with folding chairs, cups, and a thermos instead of finding a cafe. The passing cars make the scene feel simple, but it shows a travel habit that almost disappeared once service stations became normal. In 2005, an actor from The Office tested the first iPod that could play video, right as the show was struggling after Season 1. Those tiny downloads helped new viewers discover the series, turning a nearly canceled sitcom into one of television's biggest comeback stories. Switzerland in 1942 shows a cattle exhibition arranged with almost mathematical order, each row held by farmers in suits and work clothes. The overhead view turns an ordinary livestock show into a precise record of rural pride during wartime Europe. On Morris Island in July 1863, soldiers posed beside a massive 300-pounder Parrott rifle after its muzzle split during use. The damaged barrel shows how Civil War engineers pushed artillery so far that the weapon itself could become the failure point. In Paris in 1899, Hard Moon, also called Mick Teke, sat for this profile portrait while traveling with the Wild West show of Buffalo Bill Cody. Her beaded dress, long braid, and still pose show how indigenous performers were presented to European audiences as living history. In 1989, a young New Zealand performer won the Miss New Zealand crown before television made her known worldwide. The pageant photo feels surprising because it shows a polished public moment years before her fierce screen image became famous. In June 1964, a stand-in drummer played 8 Beatles shows while Ringo Starr recovered from tonsillitis. This Melbourne airport photo captures the sudden end of 10 days of global fame just before he flew back into ordinary life. In 1957, this young film actress posed beside a Spanish bullfighting poster, mixing studio glamour with a sharper European edge. The portrait catches her before later television fame, when a single still image could build a screen persona almost instantly. In Omsk in 1964, secondary school students posed in matching dark sports clothes before a physical education class. The photo feels simple, but it shows how Soviet schools treated fitness as part of discipline, routine, and youth identity. On September 6, 1987, a sitting United States president hosted the 100th birthday of the 1936 Republican presidential nominee. The guest of honor had once governed Kansas, lost a landslide election, and lived only 35 more days after this White House celebration. This photograph, often identified as the last known image of Titanic, was taken on April 12, 1912, as the liner crossed the Atlantic. Its distant shape feels haunting because the ship still looked perfectly ordinary, with only days left in its first voyage. In 1972, West Bromwich Albion goalkeeper John Osborne was photographed by the goal with a cigarette during a match. The image feels unreal today because it shows how different professional football looked before modern fitness culture changed the sport. In Tokyo in 1945, American soldiers and sailors gathered in a lively night scene soon after Japan's surrender. The colorized photo shows the strange shift from wartime tension to celebration, with uniforms, laughter, and exhaustion packed around one table. In 1996, this future rock band posed like ordinary friends years before their debut album turned them into global stars. The casual clothes and cheap camera flash make the photo feel rare because nothing in it yet reveals the arena-sized fame that was coming. In 1984, rows of Ferrari 288 Gran Turismo Omologado cars sat outside the factory like a red wall of future collector pieces. Built in very small numbers, this twin-turbo Ferrari was originally shaped by Group B racing dreams that ended before it could truly compete. In Manhattan in 1998, this Burger King let customers use free internet terminals while eating fast food. The row of bulky screens shows the early web era, when going online still felt novel enough to become a restaurant attraction. In Berlin in 1945, zoo workers tried to protect animals as the city around them collapsed. This shoe bill was moved into a keeper's home, turning an ordinary bathroom into a temporary refuge for one of the zoo's strangest birds. In Omaha in 1898, Goldie Williams refused to unfold her arms or relax her face during a police photograph after a vagrancy charge. The result became one of the most memorable mugshots of the era because she turned a formal record into open defiance. In the 1950s, Britain designed Project Blue Peacock, a 7-ton Cold War device planned for hidden use in West Germany. Its strangest detail was real. Engineers proposed putting live chickens inside so their body heat could keep the timers working through winter. On November 23, 1944, American photographer John Florea captured 13-year-old Chen Yuli smiling with the Chinese Army in Yunnan. He had joined at 11 and served as an aide with the 200th Division, a detail that makes the smile feel almost impossible to forget. On July 7, 1937, Japanese troops moved near Wanping after claiming a missing soldier gave them reason to enter the walled town. The refusal at Lugu Bridge turned a local standoff into the start of full-scale fighting between Japan and China. In 1938, a young Hollywood actress posed for a studio promotion while the film industry was turning performers into carefully managed public images. The patterned blanket, swimsuit, and relaxed outdoor pose show how old studio publicity mixed elegance, leisure, and star-making in one frame. On July 8, 1947, a United States Army statement said a flying disc had been recovered near Roswell, New Mexico. The claim was withdrawn the next day, but this scattered material became the starting point for one of America's longest-running mysteries. The copper scroll is unlike the other Dead Sea Scrolls because its text was cut into metal instead of written on parchment. Its 64 entries read like a hidden inventory, listing places where ancient valuables were supposedly buried. On July 6, 1939, Adolf Eichmann arrived in Prague to build a new office for forcing Jewish families out of Nazi-controlled territory. The system looked bureaucratic from the outside, but its real purpose was to strip people of money, rights, and homes before pushing them across the border. In the late 1890s, Mozaffar al-Din Shah Qajar of Persia posed in a camp tent after a royal leopard hunt. The staged scene shows how Qajar rulers used travel, weapons, and rare trophies to project power through the new medium of photography. At the Henrietta Awards dinner in Los Angeles on January 26, 1952, a young actress won the Star of Tomorrow award. The laughing table photo feels important because it catches her just before studio publicity turned her into one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. In Ukraine in 1941, an Italian aircrew arranged large shell casings in the snow to spell Buon Natale, meaning Merry Christmas. The cheerful message beside a camouflaged aircraft shows the strange contrast between holiday ritual and the Eastern Front winter. During Operation Compass in late 1940 to early 1941, Australian troops helped injured Italian soldiers in the North African desert. The photo shows a rare quiet moment after combat, where enemies became exhausted men needing water, shade, and care. On March 13, 1964, this final known photo shows an aging American commander receiving a hospital visit from the sitting president. He died less than a month later, making the quiet Walter Reed meeting feel like the closing frame of a military life that shaped the 20th century. This is one of the final images linked to Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, taken before the plane crossed the Andes on October 13, 1972. After the accident, 16 people survived 72 days in the mountains, turning an ordinary cabin photo into a record of one of history's most extreme survival stories. In 1960, Spain's right-wing ruler surprised Washington by refusing to fully support the trade pressure against Cuba. His reported message to Havana and refusal to share key information showed how Cold War politics could produce very unlikely alliances. This Kentucky cabin was photographed in 1948 after officials entered the home of 37-year-old Raymond Ellison and 12-year-old Imogene Sims. The case shocked readers because their marriage had followed serious charges against him, and he was arrested soon after her death. During Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, German soldiers and local Lithuanian police posed with a seized Torah scroll as a synagogue burned behind them. The image is chilling because a sacred object was turned into a trophy, while occupation and public humiliation unfolded in the same frame. In Khodorkiv in 1919, Jewish survivors of a pogrom stood for the camera with bandaged faces during the chaos of the Russian Civil War. Their stillness makes the photo powerful because it records one local tragedy inside a wider wave of anti-Jewish violence across Ukraine. In Warsaw in September 1939, Polish civilians gathered around fallen horses as the German attack cut food supplies. The scene shows how fast a modern European capital could move from normal city life into pure survival. Belgrade in 1941 shows a crushed tram and broken buildings after the German air attack during the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia. The street scene is striking because ordinary city transport was left twisted in the rubble while people tried to understand what remained. In the Ruhr in 1923, a German civilian faced French troops during the French-Belgian occupation over unpaid reparations. The tense street scene shows how the aftermath of the First World War kept Europe under pressure long after the fighting ended. This is believed to be the only known photograph of Maria Goretti, taken in early 1902 when she was about 11 years old. Months later, a neighbor's attack ended her life, and her reported forgiveness helped make this blurred farmyard image part of Catholic history. In 1903, this Ainu family posed in traditional clothing at a time when Japan was tightening control over Hokkaido and its native culture. The patterned robes, beards, and children in the center make the portrait a rare record of a people whose language and customs were already under heavy pressure. In the 1950s, an amateur bodybuilder posed in a small pump room with his contest number still pinned to his trunks. The scattered weights and bare room show bodybuilding before a glossy fitness culture, when competitors prepared in simple spaces just before stepping on stage. In Kustrin on March 12, 1945, Red Army assault engineers moved through ruins wearing SN-42 steel body armor. The heavy plates made them look almost medieval, but they were built for close urban fighting in the final push toward Berlin. This document shows Stepan Bandera under a German identity record, years before his 1954 radio interview in Cologne. The worn photo and fingerprints make the image feel less like a portrait and more like a trace of one of Eastern Europe's most controversial exile figures. On July 4, 1940, Robert Wadlow appeared at the Manistee National Forest Festival, standing 8 feet 11 inches tall as the tallest recorded person in history. This is believed to be his last known photo, taken only 11 days before a leg brace complication ended his life at 22. In Pulaski County, Arkansas, in October 1935, a teenage cotton picker looked straight at the camera during a Great Depression field photograph. Her expression makes the image powerful because it shows farm labor not as scenery, but as a young person fully aware of being watched. In Washington, D.C., in 1941, a government building cleaner paused mid-task and looked up after noticing the photographer. The steep angle makes the staircase feel huge, turning one brief glance into a sharp record of quiet labor behind official spaces. In New York on May 19, 1962, a Hollywood star attended the after-party following President Kennedy's birthday celebration. The room looks elegant and relaxed, but the date makes the photo feel heavy because it came only months before her final summer. In the Gomel region in 1943, Byelorussian partisans of the Dobrush Brigade posed with Varvara Virvich, known by the alias Katya. Her place at the center shows how young underground organizers could become symbols of resistance far beyond one forest unit. Near Königsberg on April 10, 1945, German prisoners stood in a crowded group after the Red Army took the East Prussian city. Their tired faces show the collapse of one of Germany's last major eastern strongholds only weeks before the war in Europe ended. In 1970, Sandra Brown trained at a police range after becoming the first black woman on the Oakland Police Force. The photo captures a barrier-breaking moment when one new officer stood inside a profession that had rarely made room for women like her. On May 2, 1982, the Argentine cruiser General Belgrano sank in the South Atlantic after being struck by torpedoes from a British submarine. The loss of 323 sailors made it the heaviest single naval disaster of the Falklands War. In California's San Joaquin Valley, this pole marks where the ground level stood in 1925, 1955, and 1977. The huge drop shows how pumping groundwater can slowly lower an entire landscape without people noticing day by day. In 1950, workers climbed near the top of the 200-foot antenna above the Empire State Building with Manhattan far below them. The photo shows the fearless high steel work that helped turn the skyscraper into a major broadcast tower. In Belfast in 1988, a British corporal was photographed inside a car moments before a wrong turn placed him and another soldier in the middle of an IRA funeral crowd. The image became infamous because it froze the last seconds before a street mistake turned into one of the trouble's most disturbing public incidents. In North Africa in October 1941, German soldiers staged a photo of eggs frying on a tank's sun-heated armor. The joke worked because desert heat was so extreme that even a military machine could briefly look like a kitchen stove. Near Springfield, Missouri, a truck carrying 20 tons of dynamite was struck on Interstate 44, leaving this enormous crater across the highway. The aerial photo shows how one roadside attack briefly turned a major American interstate into a broken strip of concrete and earth. In Dollerau, West Germany, on May 27, 1971, two trains collided during a school trip, and 46 students from one class were lost. The crushed carriages made a small local railway name remembered as one of the country's most painful rail tragedies. In St. Louis on May 8, 1910, young paperboys gathered around a stove before starting work at 5 in the morning. Their tired faces show how childhood labor began before sunrise, long before most city readers opened the news. In Ossining, New York, on January 12, 1928, a reporter secretly photographed Ruth Snyder in the prison chair after cameras had been banned from the room. The picture was taken with a tiny camera strapped to his ankle, turning one hidden click into one of the most infamous newspaper images of the decade. On June 28, 1922, smoke rose from Dublin's Four Courts on the first day of the Irish Civil War. The blast in the Public Records Office wiped out archives reaching back more than 1,000 years, leaving parts of Ireland's past permanently missing. Before the 1950s, someone in a Galveston vice house scratched daily earnings into this wooden wall instead of keeping a formal book. The rough numbers feel like a hidden payroll, preserving the money trail of a closed world that usually left almost no personal record. In the Netherlands, in 1945, a 10-year-old boy smiled while carrying a discarded Panzerfaust projectile from the war. The unsettling detail is how ordinary it looks, showing how children met dangerous leftovers as curiosities after the fighting had moved on. 3 Chicago teenagers are photographed after their arrest for robbing and murdering an elderly man in an apparent thrill killing. The murder caught national attention at the time. All 3 teens were released from prison within 10 years. All 3 met different fates afterwards, 1965. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most.